Golden light bathed the weathered deck of the Crimson Serpent as Captain James Blackwood surveyed his newly captured prize. Among the merchant passengers, a small figure darted between barrels, evading his crew's attempts to corral her. Her chestnut curls caught the dying sun as she finally stood before him, hands on hips, chin raised defiantly. Most children cowered before the notorious Captain Blackwood, but this girl's eyes held nothing but fascination and an unusual boldness that made even his hardened crew members exchange glances. "When I grow up," she announced with absolute certainty, "I'll marry you one day." The captain's thunderous laughter rolled across the deck as he knelt to meet her gaze. "Will you now, little lioness?" he asked, surprisingly gentle. "And what makes you so certain of our fate?" The Montgomery estate stood proudly on the hillside, overlooking Port Royal Harbour, its white columns gleaming in the Caribbean sun. Inside, 8-year-old Eliza sat stiffly in the drawing room as her mother paced furiously before her. "I've never been so frightened in all my life," Lady Montgomery declared, clutching her handkerchief. "To think my daughter was in the hands of that. That's savage." Eliza fingered the silver pendant hanging at her neck, the Montgomery family crest, a falcon clutching a sword. Her father had given it to her on her 5th birthday, a reminder of their prestigious lineage. Now it felt heavy against her skin. He wasn't savage, Mother. He was— Eliza searched for the right word. Magnificent. Her father, Edward Montgomery, the most prominent merchant in Jamaica, slammed his ledger closed. "That magnificent man killed 2 of my guards and stole cargo worth a fortune, but he didn't hurt anyone else," Eliza protested. "And he let our ship go after he took what he wanted. Enough." Her father's voice boomed through the room. "I'll hear no more about Captain Blackwood. The man is a criminal with a price on his head, and if there's any justice, he'll swing from the gallows before year's end." Eliza bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes. How could she make them understand what she'd seen? Not the fearsome pirate of legend, but a man whose eyes held secrets and sadness beneath their hardened surface. A man who'd laughed at her boldness rather than punishing it. Lady Montgomery softened, kneeling before her daughter. "Darling, you've had a terrible fright. These feelings are merely confusion. Captain Blackwood and his kind are not to be admired. They're dangerous men who live outside the law." But that night, as her governess snored softly in the adjoining room, Eliza crept to her window overlooking the harbour. Somewhere out there, the Crimson Serpent sailed under starlight. She clutched the small object the captain had pressed into her palm before sending her back to her. "Parents, a tarnished brass button from his coat. I meant what I said," she whispered. To the distant horizon, the years that followed saw Eliza's fascination with pirates grow rather than diminish. While other girls practiced needlepoint and proper tea service, Eliza bribed the stable boys to teach her to ride, astride, and convinced her cousin William to show her how to handle a small blade. "Young ladies don't need to know navigation," her tutor scolded when he caught her studying his maritime. "Charts, perhaps they should." Eliza replied with a defiant lift of her chin. By 12, she had established a secret collection of books on sailing and navigation, hidden behind the romantic novels her mother thought appropriate. By 14, she could name every major constellation and use them to chart a course. Her father's business suffered as piracy increased in the Caribbean. The Montgomery trading fleet dwindled from 12 ships to 7. Edward's face grew more lined, his temper shorter. "The Navy is useless," he complained over dinner. "Commodore Lancaster promises protection, then demands half our profits for escort ships that never materialize." "Perhaps," Lady Montgomery suggested gently, "it's time to consider Eliza's future. She's becoming a young woman. A good marriage could secure new alliances, new ships." Eliza's fork clattered against her plate. "I'm not currency to be traded, Mother." Her father's weary eyes met hers. "None of us are what we once were, Eliza. Times change." When Lady Montgomery fell ill with fever the following year, the household fell into somber quiet. Eliza spent her days reading to her mother, watching the once vibrant woman fade like a watercolor left in the sun. On her deathbed, her mother clasped Eliza's hand. "Promise me you'll be sensible, darling. This world is harder on women than men. Sometimes dreams must yield to practicality." After the funeral, Eliza stood alone on the cliffs, her mother's words weighing against the memory of a sun-weathered face and laughing eyes. The family crest felt cold against her skin. Two paths stretched before her, the practical life of a merchant's daughter, and the impossible dream of freedom and adventure that had captured her heart on a golden evening at sea. The wind caught her chestnut curls, now grown long past her shoulders, as she looked out at the endless blue. Somewhere beyond that horizon sailed the man who had unknowingly set the course of her life. A man who by now had surely forgotten the bold little girl who had once declared she would marry him. But Eliza Montgomery hadn't forgotten, and she wasn't a little girl anymore. The crimson serpent cut through the dawn mist, its blood-red flag snapping in the wind. Captain James Blackwood stood at the helm, one hand on the polished wheel, the other resting on the hilt of his sword. At 43, he wore his years like armor, each line on his face, each silver streak in his dark hair, a testament to battles won and lost. Clear skies ahead. "Captain," called Barrick, his first mate of 15 years. A mountain of a man, with skin dark as midnight and a voice like distant thunder. Blackwood nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Any sign of Navy vessels?" "None since Nassau. Seems Commodore Lancaster has pulled back to Port Royal." A muscle twitched in Blackwood's jaw at the name. Once he and Lancaster had sailed together under the same flag. Before betrayal, before everything changed. Below deck, the crew divided the spoils from their latest prize, a Dutch merchant vessel carrying silk and spices. No blood spilled, no lives lost. The captain had surrendered the moment the Crimson Serpent's flag appeared on the horizon. Such was Blackwood's reputation. What few knew was how that reputation had been built. Not on needless slaughter, as the stories claimed, but on calculated fear. The crimson flag, with its serpent design, struck terror into merchant captains throughout the Caribbean. Many surrendered without firing a shot, having heard tales of the merciless Captain Blackwood, tales that Blackwood himself had carefully cultivated. "You're brooding again," Barrick observed, moving to stand beside him. "Contemplating," Blackwood corrected with the hint of a smile. "Contemplating what?" "The king's pardon. We both know that's fool's gold." Blackwood's fingers traced the weathered wood of the wheel. "Perhaps. But gold is gold, my friend." In truth, he contemplated the strange encounter from their last raid, the little girl with eyes too old for her face. Most children cowered before him, yet she had stood defiant, declaring her future as if fate itself bent to her will. "I'll marry you one day." The memory still brought a reluctant smile to his lips. "The men want to celebrate tonight," Barrick said, interrupting his thoughts. "Good haul, no casualties." "Permission granted. But keep them in line. I want no trouble with the locals." Barrick nodded, knowing well the captain's code. No innocent blood, no mistreatment of women or children, no betraying your own. Rules that had kept them alive while other pirate crews swung from gallows or turned on each other. As the sun climbed higher, Blackwood retreated to his quarters, a space that reflected the man himself. Meticulously organized charts covered one wall. Books lined another, histories, philosophies, scientific treatises, evidence of an education few would expect from a pirate captain. He unlocked a small wooden chest and withdrew a miniature portrait in a tarnished silver frame. A woman with his same stormy eyes smiled back at him, his mother, Lady Catherine Blackwood, before scandal and ruin had claimed her life. "You raised a pirate after all." "Mother," he murmured, "born James Thorne, the third son of Lord William Thorne. He'd been destined for the Navy until his father's fall from royal favor. False accusations of treason, orchestrated by jealous rivals, including the elder Lancaster, had seen his father executed and their lands seized. His mother had died of grief shortly after. At 17, James had taken his mother's maiden name and vowed vengeance against a system that protected the powerful at the expense of justice. A knock at the door interrupted his memories. "Enter," he called, replacing the portrait. Quartermaster Quinn, a weathered Irishman who'd been with him since the beginning, stepped inside. "Course, Captain. South by southeast. There's a Spanish galleon scheduled to leave Havana in 3 days. The men are saying Lancaster has a new flagship. Faster than anything in these waters." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Then we'll need to be smarter, not faster." After Quinn departed, Blackwood unfurled the ship's flag across his table, the crimson fabric emblazoned with the coiled serpent that had become his emblem. He'd designed it himself the day he'd claimed his first ship, a reminder that even creatures without limbs could strike with deadly precision when cornered. "Let him come," Blackwood murmured to the empty room. "This sea has claimed better men than Edgar Lancaster." Outside, the crew began to sing, a haunting melody about a captain who'd sold his soul for vengeance. Blackwood smiled grimly. If only they knew how close to truth their shanty sailed. Time flowed like the tides around Port Royal, reshaping Eliza Montgomery as surely as waves reshape the shore. At 12, she traded dolls for a leather-bound journal, where she meticulously recorded ship movements in the harbor, wind patterns and star positions. The book became her constant companion, its pages filled with nautical observations and sketches of sailing vessels. A young lady should keep a diary of social engagements, not ship schedules, her governess scolded. Confiscating the journal, Eliza simply started another, this one hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. By 14, she had bribed the harbormaster's son to teach her how to tie sailing knots. Her fingers, which refused to master embroidery, deftly created bowlines and sheet bends behind the gardener's shed, while her father entertained business associates. "Your daughter grows lovelier by the day," they would comment to Edward Montgomery. "She'll make a fine match." But Eliza's beauty was merely camouflage, a distraction that allowed her secret education to continue undetected. While other girls practiced the pianoforte, she persuaded her cousin William to teach her fencing under the guise of dance lessons. "You're a natural with a blade," he admitted after she disarmed him for the 3rd time. "But what's the point? You'll never need these skills." "Perhaps," she replied, "but isn't it better to have skills you never need than to need skills you never have?" At 15, she convinced the cook's nephew, a sailor on one of her father's remaining ships, to bring her books on navigation and maritime law. She devoured them in the privacy of her bedroom, adding notes to her ever-growing journal. Meanwhile, the Montgomery shipping empire continued its decline. Pirates patrolled the shipping lanes with increasing boldness, and Edward Montgomery's face grew more haggard with each passing month. 2 more ships lost, one to a storm, another to Captain Rodriguez, a Spanish pirate known for his brutality. "We must request naval protection," Lady Montgomery urged her husband over dinner. "At what cost?" Edward replied bitterly, "Lancaster demands 1/3 of our cargo as payment. The man is no better than the pirates he claims to hunt." Eliza's ears perked up at the name. Commodore Lancaster, the Navy's rising star, ruthless in his pursuit of pirates. The man who had vowed to bring Captain Blackwood to justice. Blackwood, the name still sent a thrill through her, though it had been years since their encounter. Sometimes she wondered if she had imagined the entire episode. The raid, the fearsome captain with kind eyes, the bold promise she had made. But then she would take out the brass button he had given her, proof that the moment had been real. When fever swept through Port Royal that winter, it took Lady Montgomery in a matter of days. Eliza sat by her mother's bedside, reading aloud from her favorite poems as life slowly ebbed away. "You have your father's mind and my spirit," her mother whispered in a rare moment of lucidity. A dangerous combination in a world that expects women to be docile creatures. After the funeral, 16-year-old Eliza found herself suddenly responsible for running the Montgomery household. Under different circumstances, she might have resented the burden. Instead, she embraced it as practice for a greater challenge. "You've become quite the capable young woman," her father remarked one evening. Reviewing her impeccable household accounts, "I've had an excellent teacher," she replied. not mentioning that she had also applied his business lessons to understand navigation charts and shipping routes. Each night, after the household retired, Eliza would open her journal by candlelight, adding to her growing knowledge the latest rumors of pirate activities, the shipping schedules, the naval patrols, star charts and tide tables. In those private pages, the pieces of a plan slowly took shape. On her 17th birthday, Edward Montgomery presented his daughter with a pearl necklace that had once belonged to her mother. "She would have wanted you to have it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the image of her at your age." Eliza accepted the gift graciously. Even as she added an item to her journal that night, pearls can be traded for passage if necessary. The brass button from Captain Blackwood rested beside her inkwell as she wrote, "A talisman from another life." Another possibility, a reminder of a promise made by a child, now contemplated by a young woman who had learned that in a world controlled by men, a woman's greatest weapon was being underestimated. The morning sun cast long shadows through the drawing-room windows as Eliza stood rigidly before her father. Edward Montgomery looked older than his 50 years, the burden of financial ruin etching deep lines around his eyes. "It's decided, then?" Eliza's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly behind her back. "Commodore Lancaster has made a generous offer." Her father wouldn't meet her gaze. "The wedding will take place in 3 months' time." A heavy silence filled the room. On the mantelpiece, her mother's portrait seemed to watch with sorrowful eyes. "And what does Commodore Lancaster gain from this arrangement?" Eliza finally asked. "Our family fortune is nearly gone. Our ships are reduced to 3. What value does the great naval commander see in aligning himself with a failing merchant house?" Her father flinched at the blunt assessment. "He gains you, Eliza. Apparently that is enough." Later that afternoon, Commodore Edgar Lancaster himself arrived for tea. At 46, he cut an imposing figure in his naval uniform, medals gleaming on his broad chest. His hair, once sandy brown, had faded to grey at the temples, giving him a distinguished appearance that matched his reputation as the scourge of Caribbean piracy. "Miss Montgomery." He bowed over her hand, lips lingering too long against her skin. "You are even lovelier than rumors suggest." Eliza forced a smile, noting the coldness in his pale blue eyes, despite his warm words. "You honor our family with your attention." "Commodore, please call me Edgar. We are to be family. After all." His smile never reached his eyes. Over the next hour, Lancaster detailed his plans for their future. A grand house in Kingston, servants, social standing, everything a young woman could supposedly desire, and of course, he added, sipping his tea, "you'll have the satisfaction of knowing your father's remaining. Ships enjoy the full protection of His Majesty's Navy, the true nature of the transaction." Couldn't have been clearer had he named a price. "How fortunate for us," Eliza replied, the words tasting like ash. Before departing, Lancaster presented her with an engagement ring, a massive diamond surrounded by rubies, ostentatious and cold as its giver. It felt impossibly heavy on her finger. "A token of my esteem," he said, watching her reaction closely. "It once belonged to a Spanish countess. Her ship was liberated during my early naval career. Plundered, he meant." The hypocrisy wasn't lost on Eliza, the pirate hunter who behaved like a pirate when it suited him. That evening, Eliza walked along the harbour, the unwanted ring burning like a brand on her hand. Ships swayed gently at anchor, their masts dark against the twilight sky. Among them was the resolute Lancaster's flagship, its polished cannons gleaming with deadly promise. "Quite a rock you got there." "Miss," the gravelly voice startled her from her thoughts. An old sailor sat mending nets, his weathered face creased with the marks of decades at sea. One eye was covered by a patch, the other regarded her shrewdly. "My engagement gift," she replied stiffly, moving to continue her walk. "From the Commodore himself. I'd wager," the old man spat into the water, "he likes his possessions to shine bright, so everyone knows they're his." Eliza paused, studying the stranger more carefully. "You know Lancaster?" "Know of him." The sailor's good eye narrowed. "Known by many names on the sea." Butcher being the most polite, Eliza glanced around to ensure they were alone. "You've sailed with pirates." It wasn't a question. The old man's manner, his obvious disdain for Lancaster, the signs were clear to one who had spent years studying the seafaring world. He shrugged. "Sailed with all sorts. Pirates, merchants, navymen. They don't care what flag flies overhead." A wild thought struck her. "Have you ever sailed with Captain Blackwood?" "The Crimson Serpent." The old sailor went very still, his gnarled fingers pausing on the net. "Why would a fine lady like yourself ask about the likes of him?" Eliza hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew the brass button she'd carried for nearly a decade. The old man's eye widened. "Where did you get that?" "He gave it to me, many years ago." She closed her fingers protectively around the button. "Does he still sail these waters?" A slow smile spread across the sailor's face. "Oh, aye, the Serpent still sails. Word is, he's been spotted near Tortuga not a fortnight past." Tortuga, the infamous pirate haven, a 3-day journey with favorable winds. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing a coin into his palm. As Eliza walked back toward the Montgomery estate, the weight of the diamond ring seemed to lessen. In its place, a different weight settled, that of decision, of purpose. 3 months until the wedding. 3 months to escape a life sentence as Lancaster's decorative possession. 3 months to find Captain Blackwood and fulfill a childhood promise that now represented her only hope for freedom. Moonlight silvered the pathway as Eliza crept from the Montgomery estate, a small leather satchel clutched in her hands. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat a countdown to discovery. Inside the house, her father slept, unaware that his daughter would be gone by dawn. The previous day, Commodore Lancaster had announced he was accelerating their wedding plans. 2 weeks, he declared over dinner, his tone brooking no argument. "I've been assigned to lead a special operation against the pirate Blackwood. I want you safely settled as my wife before I depart." The news had galvanized Eliza's half-formed plans into immediate action. Now she moved silently through the sleeping town toward the harbor, dressed in clothing stolen from one of the stable boys, rough canvas trousers, a linen shirt, and a worn leather vest that concealed her feminine figure. Her long chestnut hair was tucked beneath a cap, her skin deliberately smudged with dirt. The harbor was quiet, save for the gentle lapping of waves against wooden hulls. Most of the taverns had closed for the night, leaving only the occasional watchman pacing the docks. Eliza slipped past them with practiced stealth, making her way to a modest merchant vessel, the Morning Star, scheduled to depart with the tide. Before leaving her bedroom for the last time, she had made a fateful decision. While her father attended a business meeting, she had crept into his study and opened his locked desk drawer with a key she'd secretly duplicated months ago. Inside lay a sealed packet, Lancaster's confidential naval maps showing patrol routes throughout the Caribbean. Her father, as a shipping merchant, had been granted limited access to these routes to ensure his vessels avoided pirate-infested waters. These maps now rested in her satchel alongside her journal, a small purse of coins, her mother's pearl necklace, and Blackwood's brass button. The ring Lancaster had given her lay on her dressing table with a brief note, "I cannot be what you wish me to be." Approaching the Morning Star, Eliza spotted a burly man checking cargo manifests by lantern light. The first mate, she guessed. Straightening her shoulders, she adopted the cocky stance she'd observed in young sailors. "Looking for work," she called softly, her voice deliberately pitched lower. "I'm good with navigational charts and can read the stars better than most." The first mate looked up, squinting in the dim light. "We've got a navigator." "Assistant, then," Eliza persisted. "Your captain was complaining at the Rusty Anchor last week about old Jenkins' failing eyesight. Said he nearly ran you aground off Hispaniola. The mention of the tavern and the navigator's mistake information she'd gleaned from careful eavesdropping gave her invented persona credibility." First mate studied her with narrowed eyes. "You're young, 17. Been at sea since I was 12. Another lie, but one she could support with knowledge. Name's Eli. After a moment's consideration, he jerked his head toward the gangplank. Our captain's asleep. You can make your case to him at dawn. One night's lodging in the crew quarters. If he doesn't take you on, you're back on the dock by breakfast. Understood. Understood. Eliza fought to keep the triumph from her voice. The crew quarters were cramped and rank with the smell of unwashed bodies and rum. Eliza claimed a hammock in the darkest corner, keeping her satchel close. She didn't sleep, too aware of the vulnerable position she was in and the enormity of what she'd done. Dawn found her on deck, demonstrating her knowledge to a skeptical Captain Harris. When she correctly identified their position using only the morning stars and produced her own meticulously drawn charts. His expression shifted from dismissal to grudging respect. "Where'd you learn navigation, boy?" "My father was a ship's master," she replied, the half-truth coming easily. "Taught me everything before fever took him last year." By mid-morning, the Morning Star had cleared Port Royal Harbour, its sails full with a favourable wind. Eliza stood at the rail, watching her childhood home recede into the distance. Freedom tasted of salt spray and possibility, but carried the bitter edge of uncertainty. 4 days into the voyage, the deception nearly unraveled when a sailor caught her binding her chest in the pre-dawn darkness. Quick thinking saved her, a story about a knife wound that had healed badly, leaving her embarrassed by the scarring. The sailor, superstitious like most of his kind, wanted no part of another man's misfortune and kept his mouth shut. The real test came on the 7th day when a lookout spotted, sails on the horizon, the distinctive profile of a Spanish galleon flying pirate colors. Not Blackwood's Crimson Serpent, but Captain Rodriguez's Venganza battle stations. Captain Harris bellowed as the pirate ship changed course to intercept them. Cannons were rolled out, muskets distributed. Eliza was handed a short cutlass, its weight unfamiliar compared to the fencing foil she'd practiced with. As the Venganza drew closer, its black hull cutting through the waves like a shark through calm waters, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This was not how her journey was meant to end, not when it had barely begun. Her hand found the brass button in her pocket, a talisman against fear. "Steady, lads," Captain Harris called as the pirate ship came within firing range. "We'll not surrender without a fight." Eliza tightened her grip on the cutlass. If she survived this encounter, she would be one step closer to Tortuga, and to the man whose memory had sustained her for 9 long years. The battle was brief and brutal. The Morning Star, a modest merchant vessel with only 6 cannons, stood little chance against the Venganza's superior firepower. When Captain Harris fell with a musket ball to the shoulder, the first mate wisely struck their colors in surrender. Pirates swarmed the deck, securing the crew with rough efficiency. Eliza kept her head down, cap pulled low, as she was shoved into line with the other sailors. Captain Rodriguez strutted before them, a flamboyant figure in a red coat adorned with gold braid, clearly stolen from some unfortunate naval officer. "Gentlemen," he announced in heavily accented English, "today is your unlucky day, yes? But perhaps not so unlucky as it could be." He grinned, revealing several gold teeth. "I am not a butcher like some captains. I offer you a choice. Join my crew or—" He made a diving motion with his hand. Several sailors immediately stepped forward, pragmatism overcoming loyalty. Others hesitated, weighing their options. Eliza remained still, her mind racing. Joining Rodriguez's crew would bring her no closer to finding Blackwood, but neither would feeding the sharks. Rodriguez stopped before her, eyes narrowed. "You, boy, you are too skinny for hard labor. What skills do you offer that should keep you breathing?" Eliza kept her voice low, her posture submissive. "I'm a navigator's assistant, sir. I can chart courses, read the stars, and—" She hesitated, then played her trump card. "I have naval patrol maps. Recent ones." The captain's eyebrows rose. "Show me." With trembling hands, not entirely feigned, Eliza reached into her satchel and produced Lancaster's maps. Rodriguez snatched them, examining the detailed charts with growing interest. "These are authentic," he murmured, recognizing the official naval markings. his dark eyes fixed on Eliza with new speculation. "Where did a boy like you get such things?" "My father served as a clerk to Commodore Lancaster," she lied smoothly. "Before he died, he borrowed these for me. Thought they might help me find honest work as a navigator." Rodriguez laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Instead, they have found you dishonest work. The fates, they have a sense of humor, no?" He rolled the maps carefully. "You will join my crew, boy. What is your name?" "Eli, sir. Eli Montgomery." "Well, Eli Montgomery, you have just become the most valuable cabin boy in the Caribbean." The Morning Star's cargo was efficiently transferred to the Venganza's hold. The remaining crew who refused to join the pirates were set adrift in a longboat with basic provisions, harsh but more merciful than many would have been. As the smaller vessel disappeared over the horizon, Eliza faced her new reality aboard a pirate ship. The Venganza was both magnificent and terrifying. Nearly twice the size of the Morning Star, its 3 masts supported black sails, emblazoned with a skeletal hand clutching a bleeding heart. The crew, a motley collection of Spaniards, freed slaves, and European deserters, eyed the newcomers with suspicion. Eliza was assigned to assist the ship's navigator, an ancient Spaniard called Mateo, whose rheumy eyes could barely distinguish land from sea on the horizon. Her knowledge quickly proved valuable as she helped chart a course that would avoid the naval patrols indicated on Lancaster's maps. "Where did you learn this?" Mateo asked on their 3rd day, watching her calculate their position with impressive accuracy. "Books," she replied simply. "And practice," he snorted. "Books do not teach such confidence. You have the sea in your blood, boy." If only he knew how literally true that was. The Montgomery line had been seafarers for generations before her father turned to merchant trading. Life aboard the pirate vessel was a harsh education. Eliza learned to sleep with one eye open, to eat quickly before her rations could be stolen, to move with purpose so as not to appear an easy target. She bound her chest tightly each morning before dawn and adopted mannerisms copied from the rougher boys she'd observed in Port Royal. 2 weeks into her reluctant service, the Venganza engaged a small sloop flying French colors. During the skirmish, a French sailor broke through the boarding party and charged directly at Mateo. Without thinking, Eliza grabbed a fallen sword, heavier than any practice weapon she'd used, and deflected the blow meant for the old navigator. The move was clumsy but effective. As the sailor recovered his balance, Rodriguez himself stepped in to finish the fight with a pistol shot. Afterward, the captain presented her with the sword she had wielded, a fine Spanish blade with an intricate guard. "Every pirate needs his own weapon," he declared. "You have earned this one." That night, as the crew celebrated their victory with captured rum, Eliza stood at the rail, her new sword belted at her hip. The weight of it felt both foreign and somehow right. "Have you heard of the Crimson Serpent?" she asked Mateo casually as he joined her, passing over a cup of rum. "Blackwood's ship?" The old man spat over the side. "A devil with honor, that one. Not like most. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the famous captains," she replied, her heart beating faster at the confirmation that Blackwood still sailed. "Do you know where he might be found?" Mateo gave her a shrewd look. "Seeking a new captain already, boy? Rodriguez would feed you to the sharks." "No, just stories to pass the time." The old navigator stared out at the moonlit sea. "They say he's been seen near Tortuga recently. Some business with a map to a lost island." He shrugged. "Pirate tales, mostly smoke." Eliza gripped the rail tighter, hope rising in her chest. Tortuga. Their current course would take them within 2 days' sail of the infamous pirate haven. For the first time since leaving Port Royal, she allowed herself to believe that fate might be on her side after all. Tortuga rose from the sea like a turtle's shell, hence its name, its forested hills concealing a town that existed outside the reach of any crown or country. As the Venganza dropped anchor in the crowded harbor, Eliza stood at the rail, taking in the infamous pirate haven with wide eyes. Dozens of ships crowded the bay, flying flags from every nation alongside the more ominous black banners of piracy. The waterfront blazed with torchlight, despite the early hour, the sounds of carousing carrying across the water. This was a place that never truly slept, where fortunes were won and lost between dusk and dawn, where men lived as if each day might be their last. Because for many, it would be. First time in Tortuga, boy. Rodriguez appeared beside her, resplendent in his stolen finery. Yes, Captain. Eliza kept her voice carefully neutral, though excitement and apprehension battled within her. Then some advice. He leaned closer, his breath heavy with rum. Keep your hand on your coin purse and your back to the wall. Tortuga devours the unwary. The crew was granted 3 days shore leave, while the Venganza took on supplies. Eliza followed a group of sailors into town, keeping her cap pulled low and her new sword prominently displayed. The dirt streets teemed with humanity in all its forms. Drunken pirates, painted women, merchants hawking everything from exotic spices to stolen silverware. She ducked into a tavern called the Drunken Parrot, its weathered sign depicting a bird listing comically to one side. The interior was thick with smoke and the mingled odors of unwashed bodies, spilled rum, and something feral that lurked beneath. Eliza claimed a small table in the corner, positioning herself to observe the room while keeping her back protected. A serving girl with exhausted eyes brought her rum without being asked. Eliza paid with a small coin from her dwindling supply, then settled in to listen to the conversations flowing around her. Pirates were inveterate gossips, she quickly discovered. After an hour, she'd heard tales of sea monsters, cursed treasure, and naval movements throughout the Caribbean. Most was obvious nonsense, but occasionally useful information surfaced from the frothy sea of rumor. Blackwood refused the pardon again. A one-eyed sailor was telling his companions at a nearby table. King offered amnesty to any pirate who'd hunt other pirates. Called it privateering, all nice and legal-like. Fool's game, his companion replied. Navy'll hang you just the same once they're done with you. Blackwood's no fool, the first man agreed. Word is, he's after something bigger than pardons. Some island that doesn't appear on regular charts. Eliza's heart quickened. This matched what Mateo had told her. What's so special about this island? Asked a third man. The one-eyed sailor leaned forward conspiratorially. They say it holds a treasure to buy a kingdom, or secrets that could topple one. Laughter greeted this pronouncement. Always secrets with Blackwood. Man keeps his cards closer than a virgin keeps her virtue. As the conversation devolved into cruder topics, Eliza's attention was caught by a tattered paper nailed beside the bar. Moving closer, she realized it was a wanted poster, Captain James Blackwood's face rendered in rough woodcut. The reward for his capture listed as £5,000 sterling. The likeness was poor, exaggerating his features to demonic proportions. But she would have known those eyes anywhere. They held the same intensity she remembered, though the artist had tried to imbue them with cruelty rather than the intelligence she recalled. Interested in hunting the serpent boy? The bartender had noticed her attention. Many have tried. All have failed. Just curious, Eliza replied, affecting nonchalance. They say he's in these waters. The bartender wiped a grimy glass. Serpent left yesterday with the morning tide. Disappointment crashed through her. A day, she had missed him by a single day. Any word on when he'll return? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Depends on what he finds, don't it? The man shrugged. But Blackwood's crew always returns. They've a fondness for Madame Leroux's girls and her private stock of French brandy. He gestured vaguely toward the far end of the harbour. Give it a fortnight, maybe less. A fortnight. 2 weeks in this den of cutthroats and killers, waiting for a man who might not return, who certainly wouldn't remember her, and whose help she had no right to expect. The task seemed suddenly impossible. That night, as Eliza lay in a rented room, scarcely larger than a closet, listening to the sounds of revelry and occasional violence from the street below, doubt gnawed at her resolve. She was a merchant's daughter, playing at being a pirate, risking death or worse on the strength of a childhood memory. Then her fingers found Blackwood's brass button, smooth and worn from years of handling. She remembered his laugh, the surprising gentleness in his voice when he'd called her little lioness. Most of all, she remembered the freedom she'd sensed in him, freedom she now sought for herself. Morning found her with renewed purpose. If Blackwood would return in a fortnight, then she had 2 weeks to establish herself as someone worthy of joining his crew, not as the child who had once amused him, but as Eli, a skilled navigator with valuable knowledge of naval patrol routes. Her first step was to learn everything she could about the Crimson Serpent and its notorious captain. Knowledge, after all, had always been her most reliable weapon. The fortnight passed with excruciating slowness. Eliza spent her days gathering information and her nights avoiding trouble in Tortuga's lawless streets. Her coins dwindled despite careful rationing, and she was forced to find work tallying shipments for a French merchant who cared more for mathematical accuracy than a sailor's pedigree. On the 12th day, Rodriguez's venganza departed without her. She had claimed illness, hiding in her rented room until the ship sailed. The Spanish captain would likely kill her as a deserter if their paths ever crossed again, but that was a problem for another day. Her vigilance was rewarded on the 15th morning when a cry went up from the harbour lookout. "Crimson sail on the horizon!" Eliza abandoned her ledgers mid-calculation and raced to the docks, heart pounding. Through the morning mist, a ship approached. Larger than she remembered, its distinctive blood-red sails billowing in the breeze. The figurehead, a serpent with ruby eyes, seemed to pierce the fog as the vessel glided into the harbour with the precision of a predator. She watched from the shadow of a warehouse as the Crimson Serpent dropped anchor and longboats were lowered. The crew that came ashore was a disciplined lot compared to most pirates she'd observed. No immediate stumbling toward taverns or brothels. Instead, they moved with purpose under the direction of a mountain of a man she guessed was the first mate. Then she saw him, Captain James Blackwood, stepping into a longboat with fluid grace. 17 years had added silver streaks to his dark hair and deepened the lines around his eyes, but he carried himself with the same authority she remembered. His navy coat, devoid of unnecessary ornamentation, set him apart from peacocks like Rodriguez. Eliza's practiced eye noted the details that others might miss, the way his crew positioned themselves protectively around him. The subtle scan of the harbour for threats, the pistols holstered at his belt within easy reach. This was a man who had survived 2 decades as the most hunted pirate in the Caribbean. By never letting down his guard, she followed at a discreet distance as Blackwood and a small contingent made their way to a building she'd learned was owned by a former pirate captain turned merchant. Unlike most of Tortuga's establishments, this one bore no sign and kept its windows shuttered. Business conducted there was private and most likely highly profitable. For 3 hours, Eliza waited in a tavern across the street, nursing a single mug of watered-down ale. When Blackwood finally emerged, she trailed him to the Siren's Call, an upscale establishment by Tortuga standards, where he took a private room on the 2nd floor. This was her chance. She had rehearsed her approach countless times over the past 2 weeks. The naval maps would be her entry point, valuable information that might earn her a place on his crew. She would present herself as Eli, a navigator's assistant with a gift for charts and stars. Only after securing a position would she consider revealing her true identity. As dusk fell, Eliza returned to her room to prepare. She bound her chest more tightly than usual, smudged her face with a touch of dirt, and strapped on her sword. The naval maps were carefully rolled in oilcloth to protect them from the elements. Finally, she tucked Blackwood's brass button into her pocket, a talisman for courage. The Siren's Call was busy when she arrived, pirates from various crews mingling with local women and merchants. Eliza approached the bar with forced confidence. "I have information for Captain Blackwood," she told the barkeeper, a scarred man missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He assessed her with narrowed eyes. "Captain doesn't see just anyone, boy. Tell him I have recent naval patrol routes." Lancaster's own charts, the name produced the desired effect. After a moment's consideration, the barkeeper nodded to a large man guarding the stairs.
Barrick.
Boy here claims to have something for the captain. The first mate, for it was indeed Barrick, descended with heavy steps. His dark skin was decorated with intricate scars that Eliza recognized as tribal markings from the Gold Coast of Africa. His expression remained impassive as he loomed over her. "What's your business with Captain Blackwood?" Eliza squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze steadily. "I have information that would be valuable to him. Naval patrol routes, recently acquired. Acquired how? Does it matter if they're authentic?" She produced one map partially, enough to show the official naval markings. Barrick studied her for a long moment, then grunted. "Wait here!" The minutes stretched like hours as Eliza stood rigidly by the bar, ignoring curious glances from nearby patrons. Finally, Barrick returned. "Captain will see you." "Any weapons stay with me." Reluctantly, she surrendered her sword. Then, heart hammering against her tightly bound chest, Eliza followed the massive first mate up the stairs. The private room was simply furnished but clean, a luxury in Tortuga. Blackwood sat at a table covered with maps and charts, a glass of amber liquid at his elbow. He didn't look up as she entered. "I'm told you have something of interest." Boy, that voice, deeper than she remembered. With the faint accent, she now recognized as belonging to the educated classes rather than the common sailor. Eliza swallowed hard. "Naval patrol routes, sir." "Commodore Lancaster's personal charts." At this, Blackwood finally raised his head. His storm-grey eyes locked with hers, and for a heart-stopping moment, Eliza feared he would recognize her instantly. But his gaze remained coolly assessing, showing no hint of recognition. "And how did someone like you come by such valuable information?" Dawn broke in ribbons of gold and crimson as the Crimson Serpent sliced through the waves, leaving Tortuga far behind. Eliza stood at the rail, savoring the salt spray on her face and the sense of freedom that came with open water. After 3 weeks aboard, she was finally beginning to feel like part of the crew. Her integration hadn't been easy. Captain Blackwood had accepted her as Eli based on the value of Lancaster's naval charts, but his suspicious nature meant she was watched constantly. The crew, too, had been wary of the newcomer, a young man with soft hands and educated speech. "Keep your head down and your work impeccable," advised Quinn, the Irish quartermaster who had taken a reluctant liking to her. "This lot respects skill above all else." She had followed his advice, working tirelessly alongside Ramirez, the ship's navigator. Her knowledge of stars and currents quickly proved valuable, especially when combined with her meticulous attention to detail. Gradually, the suspicious glances had faded, replaced by grudging acceptance. Captain Blackwood himself remained an enigma. He commanded with quiet authority, rarely raising his voice, yet somehow making himself heard over the worst gales. The crew obeyed instantly, not from fear, but from a deep-seated respect that Eliza had never witnessed on Rodriguez's ship. Most surprising were the rules that governed life aboard the Crimson Serpent. Discipline was strict but fair. Violence among crew members was punished swiftly. Women captives were to be treated with respect. Children were never to be harmed under any circumstances. "Why does he care?" Eliza had asked Quinn one evening as they shared the night watch. "Captain's got his reasons," the quartermaster had replied cryptically. "Just as he's got reasons for seeking that island. The island." It was mentioned in whispers throughout the ship, their true destination beyond the raiding and trading that occupied their days. Eliza had seen Blackwood poring over ancient charts in his cabin, marking positions with careful precision. Now, as she gazed out at the endless blue horizon, she felt someone approach. Turning, she found Barrick, the imposing first mate, studying her with his usual inscrutable expression. "Captain wants you," he said simply. Her heart quickened as she followed him to Blackwood's cabin. In their 3 weeks at sea, she had rarely been summoned directly. Had her disguise been discovered? Had she made some critical error? The captain's quarters were spacious compared to the crowded conditions below deck. Charts and maps covered the large table in the center. Books lined the shelves, more than she had ever seen aboard a ship. Blackwood stood with his back to her, studying a weathered map. "You wanted to see me, Captain." She kept her voice steady, pitched low as had become her habit. He turned, those storm-grey eyes assessing her as they always did. "Your calculations for our course to Bermuda. Explain them." Relief washed through her. "A test, nothing more. The prevailing winds this time of year favor a more northerly approach," she began, pointing to the chart. "Here and here we'll encounter currents that can either speed our journey or add days to it, depending on how we navigate them." Blackwood listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slightly. "And the naval patrols? Based on Lancaster's charts, they concentrate their efforts here." She indicated several areas. "But knowing the Commodore, he likely changes patterns periodically. I would suggest we approach from the southwest instead." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed his face. "You speak as if you know Lancaster personally." Eliza froze momentarily, then recovered. "Only by reputation, Captain. His patterns are discussed often among merchants, trying to avoid entanglements." He studied her for a long moment, then, abruptly, changed topics. "You've proven useful these past weeks. Eli, more educated than most who find their way to Tortuga." "My father believed in education," she replied carefully. "And what did your father think of his son turning pirate?" "He died before I made that choice." Blackwood's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Many aboard this ship have lost family?" "It's a bond of sorts." The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. This was a side of Blackwood she hadn't witnessed, reflective, almost gentle. It reminded her of the man who had knelt to speak to a bold child 17 years ago. He turned back to his maps, running a finger along a course that led to nowhere charted. "Tell me, Eli, do you believe in places that exist beyond ordinary maps? Islands that appear and disappear with the phases of the moon?" "I believe the sea keeps many secrets," she answered truthfully. This earned her a rare smile, a diplomatic answer. "But this," he tapped a spot marked with a red cross, "is no myth. The Isle of Forgotten Souls. It appears on no official charts, yet 3 separate accounts confirm its existence." "What's so special about this island?" Eliza asked, curiosity overtaking caution. Blackwood's eyes took on a distant look. "It holds something valuable beyond gold or gems, something that could change fortunes, and perhaps right old wrongs." Before she could press further, a shout came from above. "Sail! Spanish colors!" The moment shattered. Blackwood was instantly the captain again, all business as he strode from the cabin. "We'll continue this discussion another time, Mr. Montgomery. For now, it seems we have company." Left alone in his cabin, Eliza's gaze was drawn to a small wooden chest, partially visible beneath some charts. The lock was ornate, clearly valuable, but what caught her eye was the coat of arms engraved on its surface. She had seen that crest before, in history books from her father's library. It belonged to the Thorne family, once prominent in England's court, before their sudden fall from grace, nearly 20 years ago. Another piece of the puzzle that was Captain James Blackwood slid into place. The tempest struck without warning, turning day to night as clouds black as pitch swallowed the sun. Waves rose like mountains, crashing over the bow with furious force. The Crimson Serpent, for all its majesty, became a fragile toy in the grasp of nature's fury. "Secure the mainsail." Blackwood's voice carried over the howling wind as he gripped the wheel, fighting to keep the ship from broaching. "All hands on deck." Eliza scrambled alongside the crew, fingers numb with cold as they fought to control billowing canvas. Rain lashed her face, salt water burned her eyes, but she worked with desperate precision. Her knowledge of sailing had been largely theoretical until these past weeks. Now it was being tested in the crucible of survival. A massive wave struck the starboard side, sending the ship lurching violently. Eliza lost her footing on the slick deck, sliding toward the rail. Her desperate grab for a rope missed, and for one heart-stopping moment she was airborne, the churning sea rushing up to meet her. A powerful hand clamped around her wrist. Varick, the first mate, braced against the mast, hauled her back aboard with a single mighty pull. "Mind yourself, Montgomery," he shouted over the storm's roar. "Captain needs every hand today." For hours they battled the tempest. When a spar snapped from the mizzenmast, nearly impaling 2 crewmen, it was Eliza who improvised a solution, using her knowledge of knots and leverage to secure the dangerous debris. Captain Blackwood himself nodded approval as he passed, his face streaked with rain and exhaustion. By dawn, the storm had moved on, leaving the Crimson Serpent battered but intact. The crew, bone-weary but alive, set about repairs with the quiet efficiency Eliza had come to admire. She was checking damaged rigging when a sharp pain lanced through her side, a consequence of being slammed against the rail during the worst of the gale. "You're injured." Blackwood appeared beside her, his keen eyes missing nothing. "It's nothing, Captain," she replied. Straightening despite the pain, Dr. Morris will determine that. His tone brooked no argument. "You did well during the storm, Montgomery. Few newcomers show such composure." The ship's doctor, a former naval surgeon with a perpetual scowl, grudgingly examined her in his small cabin below deck. The diagnosis was 3 cracked ribs. Painful but not life-threatening if properly bound. "Stripped to the waist," he ordered gruffly, preparing bandages. Eliza's blood ran cold. "I can bind it myself." "Don't be foolish, boy. I need to check for additional injuries." "Please," she insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I have scars from childhood. I don't show them to anyone." Morris studied her face, his expression softening slightly. "Pride has no place in healing, lad. But very well. I'll turn my back while you remove your shirt. Keep your undergarments on if you must, but I'll need to see the ribs." It was the closest compromise she could hope for. With trembling fingers, Eliza loosened her shirt, keeping her binding in place. "Ready," she said once her torso was sufficiently exposed to show the bruising along her side, while still concealing her true form. The doctor worked quickly, his touch clinical, as he wrapped the bandages tightly around her ribs. "You'll need rest. No climbing rigging for at least a week. The captain, I'll inform him. You'll be assigned to navigation duties until you're healed." He finished securing the bandage. "Now go. My quarters aren't for lingering." Captain Blackwood, upon hearing the doctor's report, assigned Eliza to his cabin to assist with charts and logs while she recovered. It was a mixed blessing, safer than trying to maintain her disguise during physical labor, but far more dangerous in terms of prolonged proximity to the captain's observant gaze. On the 3rd afternoon of this arrangement, Blackwood was called away to deal with a dispute among crew members. Left alone in his cabin, Eliza found her attention drawn once again to the wooden chest she had noticed before. The key was absent, but her misspent youth-learning locks from Port Royal's less reputable citizens had left her with skills unbecoming a merchant's daughter. With a quick glance at the door, she knelt before the chest. 2 hairpins from her carefully hidden stash, a minute of careful manipulation, and the lock yielded with a soft click. Inside lay several items wrapped in velvet. Her fingers trembled as she uncovered the first, a man's signet ring bearing the Thorne family crest. The second was a carefully preserved letter with a broken wax seal. But it was the third item that stole her breath, a miniature portrait in a silver frame. The painting showed a family, a stern-faced gentleman in noble attire, a beautiful dark-haired woman with Blackwood's stormy eyes, and 3 young boys. The eldest 2 resembled their father, but the youngest, perhaps 7 years old, was unmistakably a youthful version of the man she knew as Captain Blackwood. Footsteps approached outside. Eliza hastily replaced the items, closed the chest, and returned to the charts on the table, heart pounding in her ears. Blackwood entered, his expression thunderous from dealing with the dispute. He paused, studying her with narrowed eyes. "Is something amiss, Montgomery?" "No, Captain," she replied, willing her voice to remain steady. "Just struggling with these calculations through the pain." He seemed to accept this, though his gaze lingered a moment too long. "The pain will pass. It always does." Something in his tone suggested he spoke of more than physical injuries. As he turned to pour himself a measure of rum, Eliza wondered which had shaped him more profoundly, the loss of his noble heritage or the years spent beyond the law's reach. Either way, the man behind the fearsome Captain Blackwood was far more complex than she had imagined during those childhood dreams of adventure and freedom. Whether that made her quest more hopeless or more worthwhile, she couldn't yet say. The news arrived with a merchant vessel they encountered off the coast of Hispaniola, a ship willing to trade information for safe passage. Captain Blackwood stood grim-faced as the merchant captain delivered his report. "Commodore Lancaster has a new mandate from the Crown," the portly man explained, nervously eyeing the pirates surrounding him. "3 ships of the line now hunt the Crimson Serpent exclusively. They've abandoned other patrols to focus solely on your capture." Eliza, standing among the officers as befitted her new role as assistant navigator, felt ice form in her stomach at Lancaster's name. "This obsession seems excessive, even for Edgar," Blackwood remarked, his casual tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. The merchant hesitated. "There's more, Captain. It's personal now. Word in Port Royal is that Lancaster's bride-to-be vanished the night before he was to sail. He believes you took her." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crew. Blackwood's expression darkened. "I've taken no women against their will, merchant. Lancaster knows this. With respect, sir, Lancaster claims you've broken your code before. Something about a shared past." The tension on deck thickened. Eliza watched Blackwood's knuckles whiten around his sword hilt before he regained control. "Our business is concluded," he told the merchant coldly. "You have your safe passage. Go." Once the merchant vessel was well away, Blackwood called his officers to the great cabin. Eliza, included by virtue of her navigation duties, stood silently as the captain paced the length of the room. "Lancaster will not stop," he finally said. "Not until one of us is dead. We've evaded him before," Quinn offered. "This is different." Blackwood's gaze swept the room. 3 ships of the line means the Crown has sanctioned his vendetta. He'll have full support of every port flying the British flag. Then we avoid British ports, Barrick suggested. "It's more complex than that." Blackwood unrolled a map across the table. "Our course to the Isle of Forgotten Souls takes us through waters Lancaster knows well. He was there when we first heard the legend, 20 years ago when we both served the Crown." This revelation sent another shock through Eliza. Lancaster and Blackwood had served together. The pieces of Blackwood's mysterious past were slowly assembling into a coherent picture. What exactly is on this island that's worth such risk? Asked Ramirez, the navigator. Blackwood was silent for a moment. "Redemption, perhaps, or justice. Either way, we proceed as planned." After dismissing the others, he asked Eliza to remain. When they were alone, he studied her with unsettling intensity. "You tensed at the mention of Lancaster's bride. Why?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. I've heard stories, Captain, about his cruelty to women, yet you seemed personally affected." His gaze was relentless. "There's more to you than you've shared, Montgomery. I've given you considerable latitude because your skills are valuable, but my patience with secrets has limits." Eliza swallowed hard. "We all have pasts we'd rather not discuss, Captain. Even you." A dangerous stillness came over him. For a moment, she feared she'd pushed too far. Then unexpectedly his expression softened. "Fair point, young Montgomery. Fair point indeed." He turned to the map, changing the subject. "Show me how you'd evade a pursuit force coming from the east." The next morning, they intercepted a British scouting sloop, a fast, light vessel used for reconnaissance. The ensuing battle was brief but fierce. The Crimson Serpent's superior firepower quickly forced the smaller ship to strike its colors. Among the captured crew, they discovered a naval officer carrying dispatches for Lancaster. Blackwood personally interrogated the man, emerging from the questioning with a face like thunder. "Lancaster knows our heading," he announced to his officers. "The scout was reporting our position." "How could he know our course?" Quinn demanded. "We've told no one of the island, because he helped create the original charts," Blackwood replied grimly. "And because he wants what's hidden there as much as I do." The naval officer's uniform jacket lay on the table. its insignia gleaming in the lantern light, the gold braid and decorations of Lancaster's personal command. Eliza stared at it, remembering identical insignia on the uniform Lancaster had worn when discussing their wedding plans. "Can we reach the island before him?" Barrick asked. Blackwood turned to Eliza. "Mr. Montgomery, your assessment?" She studied the charts, calculating distances and likely sailing speeds. "If we alter course here, sailing through this passage, we gain 2 days. It's dangerous, shallow reefs and unpredictable currents, but navigable with proper care." "You're suggesting the Devil's Throat," Ramirez said incredulously. "Ships twice our size have been swallowed whole there, which is precisely why Lancaster won't expect it," Eliza countered. "He knows these waters, yes, but he commands a heavier vessel with deeper draft. He'll be forced to go around while we cut through." Blackwood studied the proposed route, then nodded. "Bold but calculated. I approve." That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Blackwood found Eliza at the bow, charting stars for their dangerous passage. "Lancaster and I were midshipmen together," he said without preamble. "Later lieutenants on the same ship. We were friends once, if you can believe it. What happened?" she asked, setting aside her instruments. Blackwood's gaze fixed on the horizon. "He chose advancement over honor, made a devil's bargain that cost innocent lives, including my family, and the island contains proof of his treachery, documents that would strip him of rank and reputation." His fingers drummed thoughtfully on the rail. "Strange that he believes I took his bride. It's not my style." "Perhaps she left of her own accord," Eliza suggested carefully, "to escape a fate she didn't choose." Blackwood's eyes, when they met hers, held an unexpected warmth. "Perhaps. Lucky woman if so. Lancaster is not known for kindness to those he considers his property." The conversation stirred dangerous emotions in Eliza, not just the old childhood fascination, but something deeper, more complex. This man, with his contradictions and hidden depths, was becoming far more than a means of escape from Lancaster. He was becoming a man she could genuinely admire, perhaps even love. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. The Devil's Throat lived up to its fearsome reputation. Jagged reefs lurked beneath deceptively calm waters, while unpredictable currents threatened to dash the Crimson Serpent against the coral at any moment. For 2 days, Eliza barely slept, working alongside Ramirez to guide the ship through the treacherous passage. "You have good instincts," the old navigator grudgingly admitted as they charted their final approach. "Better than most men I've sailed with." On the 3rd morning, just as they were nearing the end of the passage, a British patrol sloop appeared at the channel's entrance behind them. "Lancaster's scout," Blackwood observed grimly from the quarterdeck. "They won't risk following us through, but they'll report our position." "We've gained our advantage then," Eliza said. 2 days, as predicted." Blackwood nodded, his gaze lingering on her with a curious intensity that made her heart quicken. "Well done, Montgomery." They had just cleared the passage when the lookout's cry rang out. "Sail ho! Spanish colors!" The Spanish merchantman attempted to flee, but stood little chance against the Crimson Serpent's superior speed. As they drew alongside, Blackwood ordered warning shots across the merchant's bow. "Prepare to board. No unnecessary bloodshed." The Spanish captain, seeing the futility of resistance, struck his colors. Most boardings proceeded routinely, the pirates securing valuable cargo while the merchant crew stood by, helpless but unharmed. This time was different. "They're hiding something," Barrick reported after a preliminary search. "Armed men below deck. Spanish Marines," Blackwood concluded. "A trap." The words had barely left his mouth when the hidden soldiers burst from the hold. The peaceful surrender transformed instantly into desperate combat. Steel clashed against steel as the 2 crews fought across both vessels. Eliza found herself in the thick of battle, her fencing skills translated into survival as she parried a thrust from a Spanish Marine. Her ribs, still tender from her earlier injury, protested with each movement, but adrenaline dulled the pain. Across the deck, she spotted Blackwood surrounded by 3 opponents. The captain fought with lethal grace, his movements economical and precise. But even his skill might not be enough against such odds. Without hesitation, Eliza lunged toward him, engaging one of his attackers from behind. The Marine spun to face her, surprise flickering across his face at her slight build before his training reasserted itself. He attacked with brutal efficiency, forcing her back toward the rail. Eliza feinted left, then ducked right, a move her cousin had taught her years ago. The Marine's momentum carried him forward as her blade found his shoulder. Not a killing blow, but enough to remove him from the fight. "Behind you!" Blackwood shouted. She turned just as another Marine swung his cutlass. She blocked, but the force of the blow sent shockwaves through her already injured ribs. Pain exploded in her side, driving the breath from her lungs. Her foot slipped in a pool of blood, and she went down hard, her opponent raising his blade for a killing stroke. Blackwood's pistol barked. The Marine crumpled. The captain extended his hand, pulling Eliza to her feet with a strength that belied his lean frame. "You fight well, Montgomery," he said, a new respect in his eyes. "But you're wounded." Before she could protest, he guided her toward the surgeon's station that had been hastily established on the main deck. The battle was winding down, the remaining Spanish Marines overwhelmed by superior numbers. "Ribs again," Blackwood told Dr. Morris. "See to him!" The doctor cut away Eliza's bloodied shirt without ceremony, revealing the bandages beneath. "These need changing," he muttered, reaching for fresh linen. Too late, Eliza realized her danger. In the chaos of battle, her binding had loosened. As Morris unwound the old bandages, the truth was suddenly, irrevocably exposed. The doctor froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Captain!" he called, his voice strained. Blackwood, who had been conferring with Quinn nearby, turned. His expression, as he took in the scene, was one Eliza would never forget. Confusion giving way to disbelief, then hardening into something cold and unreadable. "Cover yourself," he ordered tersely, tossing her his coat, clutching the garment to her chest. Eliza met his gaze steadily, despite the fear coursing through her. Around them the crew had fallen silent, staring in astonishment at the revelation. "To my cabin. Now." Blackwood's voice was dangerously soft. The walk across the deck, past the stunned faces of men she'd worked alongside for weeks, was the longest of Eliza's life. Once inside the captain's quarters, Blackwood shut the door with controlled precision. "Explain yourself." The 3 words fell like stones. "My name is Eliza Montgomery," she began, chin raised despite her trembling hands. "Daughter of Edward Montgomery of Port Royal." The merchant, recognition flickered in his eyes. "I remember him. But that doesn't explain this deception. I was fleeing an arranged marriage to Commodore Lancaster." At this, Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "You're the missing bride." "I was never his bride," she corrected sharply. "It was a business arrangement, nothing more. My father's ships in exchange for my freedom. So you chose piracy instead." His tone made it clear how foolish he found this decision. "Why my ship specifically?" "There are dozens of pirate vessels in these waters." Eliza hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew the brass button he had given her years ago. "Because we've met before, Captain." He took the button, turning it over in his fingers with a frown. "I don't recall. I was 8 years old. Your crew boarded my father's ship. While the adults cowered, I approached you on deck. The memory was crystalline, preserved by years of reflection. I told you that when I grew up, I would marry you one day." Blackwood stared at her, genuine shock replacing his anger. "The little girl with the chestnut curls." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You called me sir when everyone else was calling me devil." "You laughed," Eliza recalled softly. "You called me little lioness and gave me this button from your coat. It was the first time I'd felt truly seen." Good God! Blackwood ran a hand through his hair, momentarily at a loss. "That was nearly 2 decades ago." 17 years, she confirmed. "I never forgot." He studied her with new eyes, seeing beyond the disguise to the woman beneath. "You risked your life based on a childhood encounter?" "I risked my life for freedom," she corrected. "You were simply the means I chose. For a long moment he was silent, weighing her words. Then unexpectedly he laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his face. "Brave and pragmatic," he murmured, almost to himself. A rare combination. Relief washed through her. She wasn't going to walk the plank after all. "What happens now?" she asked. The humor faded from his expression. "That depends on the crew. Women aboard ship are considered bad luck by many sailors. Superstition runs deep at sea. I've proven my worth," she argued. "My gender doesn't change my skills." "No," he agreed, "but it changes everything else." The ship's bell rang, summoning the crew to gather on the main deck. Men clustered in murmuring groups, exchanging glances as Captain Blackwood emerged from his cabin with Eliza at his side. She had been given proper women's clothing from the Spanish merchantman's cargo, a simple blue dress that felt strangely foreign after weeks in sailor's garb. "You all know by now," Blackwood began without preamble, his voice carrying across the assembled crew, "that the sailor we knew as Eli Montgomery is, in fact, a woman." A rumble of voices rose and fell. Some men looked outraged, others merely curious. A few nodded as if pieces of a puzzle had finally aligned. "Her name is Eliza Montgomery of Port Royal. She came aboard under false pretenses, but has served this ship well. I've called you together to determine her fate." Eliza stood straight back beside him, chin raised despite the fear churning in her stomach. These men had been her comrades. Now they might become her executioners. "Women bring bad luck at sea," called a voice from the back. "She's already brought us luck, you fool," countered Quinn. "Best navigation we've had in years." "She lied to us all," objected another sailor. "As if half the men aboard don't sail under false names," Barrick rumbled, his deep voice cutting through the discord. "How many of you told the complete truth when you joined?" This silenced some of the protests, but the tension remained palpable. "The code is clear," Blackwood continued. "Deception is punishable at the captain's discretion. As captain, I recognize the value Miss Montgomery has brought to this ship. I propose she remain aboard, not as a common sailor, but as a navigation officer answering directly to me." This declaration sparked renewed debate. Eliza watched faces carefully, gauging the sentiment. The crew seemed evenly divided, half accepting Blackwood's judgment, half resistant to breaking with tradition. "Let her speak for herself," suggested Ramirez, the old navigator who had worked most closely with her. "We've heard your thoughts, Captain. Let's hear hers." All eyes turned to Eliza, the moment stretched, pregnant with possibility and danger. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I won't apologize for seeking freedom," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Each of you came to this ship for your own reasons: wealth, adventure, escape from the law. I came for the chance to chart my own course, rather than be bartered away like cargo." She met their gazes directly, one by one. "I lied about my name and gender, yes, but every calculation I made was honest. Every watch I stood was vigilant. Every battle I fought was alongside you, not against you." She touched her bandaged ribs. "I've bled on these decks just as you have." A few nods greeted these words. Encouraged, she continued, "Judge me by my actions, not my sex. I've proven I can be valuable to this ship. Give me the chance to continue doing so." Silence fell as her words hung in the salt-laden air. Then Barrick stepped forward. "I stand with the captain," the massive first mate declared. "The woman stays." "As do I," added Quinn. "She saved my life in the Spanish fight." Ramirez merely nodded his agreement, but it carried weight among the navigational crew. "A vote, then," Blackwood decided. Those in favor of Miss Montgomery remaining aboard stepped to starboard. Those opposed to port. For a heart-stopping moment, no one moved. Then gradually, men began shifting position. When the movement ceased, nearly two-thirds of the crew stood to starboard. Relief washed through Eliza like a physical force. "The matter is settled," Blackwood announced. "Miss Montgomery stays. She'll be quartered in the small cabin adjacent to mine, with a guard posted for her protection until adjustments are made." His gaze swept the crew. "She is under my personal protection. Remember that." The crew dispersed, returning to their duties with the practicality of men accustomed to unusual circumstances. Eliza found herself approached by sailors who clapped her shoulder or nodded respect, the same gestures they'd offer a male comrade. It was, in its way, more meaningful than any formal courtesies she'd received in Port Royal society. Later, as sunset painted the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, Blackwood found her at the stern, watching their wake cut through the darkening sea. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, leaning against the rail beside her. "The hard part begins now. How so?" "Being the only woman among 60 men is a precarious position. Being a woman under the protection of the captain is even more complicated." His expression was unreadable in the fading light. "There will be talk. There's always talk," she countered. "In Port Royal they whispered because I read books and asked questions. Here they'll whisper for different reasons. At least these whispers come with freedom." He studied her with those storm-grey eyes. "You're not what I expected, Eliza Montgomery. Nor you, Captain Blackwood. Or should I say James Thorne?" His expression sharpened. "You've been investigating me. I saw the family portrait," she admitted. The crest matched historical accounts of the Thorne family's fall from grace. Instead of anger, his response was a wry smile. "Clever as well as brave. A dangerous combination. Is that why you agreed to let me stay? Because I know your secret?" "I agreed because you earned your place." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book, his personal journal, she realized. And perhaps because of this, he opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. There, in precise handwriting, was an entry dated 17 years prior: "Encountered Edward Montgomery's merchant vessel today. Standard seizure of cargo, no resistance offered. A curious incident with Montgomery's daughter, a bold child who declared with utmost seriousness that she would marry me when she grew up. First genuine laugh I've had in months. Gave her a button from my coat as a token, which seemed to delight her beyond reason. Strange to find such innocent joy amid this life I've chosen." Eliza stared at the words, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "You remembered. It seems we both carried tokens from that day," he said quietly, closing the journal. "Though I never imagined the little lioness would grow up to storm back into my life quite so dramatically." As darkness fell around them, something shifted in the air between captain and former cabin boy, something neither had anticipated when their paths crossed for the second time in Tortuga. Dawn broke over calm seas as the lookout's cry rang out, "Land ho! Dead ahead!" The Isle of Forgotten Souls emerged from the morning mist like a mirage, a jagged silhouette against the pink-gold horizon. Steep cliffs rose from treacherous shoals, giving way to dense jungle that covered the island's interior. No beaches offered easy landing, no natural harbor welcomed visitors. "Exactly as the charts described," Eliza murmured, standing beside Blackwood on the quarterdeck. The past week had established a new rhythm aboard the Crimson Serpent. She in her dual role as navigator and the captain's unexpected ally, the crew gradually adjusting to her true identity. "The southern approach seems least hazardous," she suggested, studying the island through a spyglass. "That inlet between the rock formations might allow a longboat passage." Blackwood nodded. "Prepare the landing party. 12 men, well armed." An hour later, 2 longboats pushed away from the Crimson Serpent, cutting through gentle swells toward the forbidding shoreline. Blackwood commanded the first boat, with Barrick, Quinn, and Eliza among his chosen companions. The second boat carried additional crew to secure their landing site. "Legend says the island appears only when it wishes to be found," Quinn remarked as they rowed closer. "Some claim it moves with the phases of the moon." "Superstitious nonsense," Barrick growled, though his eyes scanned the cliffs with unusual wariness. "All legends contain a kernel of truth," Blackwood replied. "This island is difficult to locate because of treacherous currents and its position relative to prevailing winds. Navigation charts rarely agree on its exact coordinates. The inlet proved navigable, though barely. Massive stone formations rose on either side, creating a narrow channel that opened into a small, sheltered cove. Ancient stone steps, half reclaimed by vegetation, climbed from the water's edge into the jungle above. "Someone built this," Eliza observed. tracing weathered carvings on the stone as they secured the boats. Centuries ago, by the look of it. Spanish, perhaps, Blackwood mused, or older. The first European accounts of this island date from Columbus's time. The landing party ascended the steps cautiously, weapons ready. At the summit, the jungle opened to reveal stone ruins, the remains of what might once have been a temple or fortress. Vegetation had claimed most structures, massive roots splitting ancient masonry, vines strangling fallen columns. "Spread out," Blackwood ordered. "Search for anything unusual, but stay within earshot. This place has claimed unwary explorers before." As the men dispersed in pairs, Blackwood gestured for Eliza to follow him toward the largest structure, a partially collapsed building at the center of the complex. The entrance was still intact, a dark moor leading into cool shadows. "What exactly are we looking for?" Eliza asked as they lit torches. "Documents," Blackwood replied. "Records dating back to the 1660s, hidden here by a Spanish governor who fell from favor. Among them are accounts of bribes paid to British officials, including the ancestors of certain prominent families." "Lancaster's family," Eliza guessed, following him into the dimness. "And those who conspired with them to destroy mine." His voice echoed slightly in the enclosed space. "My father was executed for treason, but the true traitors were those who accepted Spanish gold to betray their own countrymen." The interior opened into a chamber where stone pedestals stood in concentric circles. At the center, a raised platform held what appeared to be an altar of some kind. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the ceiling, illuminating ancient carvings along the walls. Maritime scenes depicting ships, sea creatures and star patterns. "These are navigational markers," Eliza realized. Studying the symbols, star positions, ocean currents, she traced a particular constellation with her fingertips. "This shows the night sky during the winter solstice." Blackwood nodded approvingly. The people who built this were seafarers who understood the stars. They used this place to track celestial movements, perhaps to predict weather patterns or optimal sailing conditions. Their exploration led them to a smaller chamber beyond the main hall. Here the floor bore a circular design, with radial lines extending outward like a compass rose. In the center stood a stone plinth with a flat top, conspicuously empty. "Something was kept here," Blackwood murmured, examining the dust-free circle on the plinth surface. "Recently removed." A shout from outside interrupted their investigation. They emerged to find Quinn and another sailor standing before a section of wall that had partially collapsed, revealing a hidden chamber within. "Captain, we found something." The narrow opening led to a small room that had been protected from the elements for centuries. Unlike the ceremonial spaces they'd explored earlier, this chamber was clearly designed for storage. Stone shelves lined the walls, holding decaying wooden chests and pottery vessels. Blackwood approached one chest that appeared newer than the others, its wood weathered but not ancient, its metal fittings tarnished but intact. With careful hands, he lifted the lid. Inside lay a leather folio containing yellow documents, their Spanish script faded but legible. As Blackwood examined them, his expression hardened. "These are the records," he confirmed. "Ledgers detailing payments to Lord William Lancaster, Edgar's grandfather, and his conspirators, including those who testified against my father." Eliza peered over his shoulder at the damning evidence. "This proves your family was betrayed, and that Lancaster's position was built on corruption," Blackwood added grimly. "His family has held naval commissions for 3 generations based on a foundation of treason." As they carefully extracted the documents, Eliza's attention was drawn to something half-buried in the debris beside the chest, a flat stone tablet covered with unfamiliar markings. She brushed away the dust, revealing an intricate map carved into the surface. "Captain," she called, excitement coloring her voice. "Look at this." Blackwood knelt beside her, torch held close to illuminate the find. The tablet depicted an archipelago, with one island prominently marked by a symbol resembling a crown. "This doesn't match any known Caribbean chart," he murmured. tracing the coastlines with a finger. Could it be another treasure location? Quinn suggested, peering over their shoulders. Or the original homeland of the people who built this place, Eliza offered. Before they came to these islands, whatever its significance, the stone map was clearly ancient, far older than the Spanish documents they'd come to find. Blackwood carefully wrapped it in a piece of sailcloth. We'll take both, he decided. The documents are our purpose, but this map may lead to something even more valuable. As they emerged from the ruins, a shout came from the lookout they'd posted on the cliffs above the cove. Sail! Naval colors. Blackwood's expression darkened. Lancaster, how did he find us so quickly? Eliza asked as they hurried toward the vantage point. The answer became clear as they gazed out to sea. There, beyond the Crimson Serpent, a Royal Navy frigate approached from the east. On its deck, a figure in naval uniform observed them through a spyglass. He followed the same charts, Blackwood realized. He knew we were coming here. We need to leave, Barrick urged. Now before they can position to block our escape. As the landing party rushed to the longboats, Eliza cast one last glance at the mysterious ruins. For centuries, this island had guarded its secrets. Now those secrets were leaving with them, along with whatever consequences they might bring. The race back to the Crimson Serpent became a desperate sprint as Lancaster's frigate, the Indomitable, closed the distance. Blackwood's crew had already prepared for quick departure. Anchors raised and sails ready to unfurl at command. They'll try to position between us and open water, Blackwood shouted as their longboats reached the ship. We need speed and maneuverability. The moment the landing party scrambled aboard, the Crimson Serpent surged into motion, sails catching the freshening breeze. Eliza joined Ramirez at the navigation table, calculating their best escape route. The Western Passage, she advised, pointing to a narrow channel between two small islets. Shallow waters. The frigate's deeper draft won't allow pursuit, Blackwood nodded grimly. Set course. All hands to stations. Gun crews ready! The Indomitable adjusted its approach, attempting to cut off their escape. Its superior firepower was obvious, 3 gun decks to the Crimson Serpent's 2, with heavier cannons that could outrange the pirate vessel. They're signaling, Quinn reported, spyglass trained on the naval ship. Demanding surrender. Signal back our terms, Blackwood replied with grim humor. They can have my surrender when they pry it from my cold, dead hands. The naval frigate's response came in the form of cannon fire, a warning shot that splashed short of their bow. They don't want to sink us, Eliza realized. Lancaster wants you alive. And the documents we carry. Blackwood patted the leather satchel where they'd secured both the Spanish ledgers and the ancient stone map. Return fire! Aim for their masts and rigging. The Crimson Serpent's guns roared in defiance, sending iron shots screaming toward the Indomitable. Several balls struck home, splintering wood and tearing canvas. But the naval vessel absorbed the damage and responded with a devastating broadside that shook the pirate ship to its timbers. Damage report, Blackwood demanded. Taking on water below, came the reply from below decks. Gun deck hit. 3 dead, 7 wounded. Eliza watched Blackwood's face harden into a mask of determination. This was the captain in his element, calm amid chaos, mind-calculating odds and options, even as destruction reigned around them. We can't outgun them, she said quietly. Joining him at the wheel, no, he agreed. But we can outthink them. The naval frigate was maneuvering for another broadside when Blackwood made his move. Instead of continuing toward the Western Passage, he ordered a sharp turn directly toward the Indomitable. Hard to port. All hands brace for impact. The Crimson Serpent heeled over dramatically, its course now set to cross the frigate's bow at point-blank range. It was a desperate gambit, sacrificing their starboard side to enemy fire while positioning for a single devastating broadside of their own. Fire as your guns bear, Blackwood commanded. The Serpent's port guns unleashed hell at nearly touching distance, the shot tearing through the Indomitable's forecastle and bow sections. Chain shot shredded the frigate's headsails and forward rigging, while grape shot swept its forward deck clear of men. The cost was high. The naval vessel's return fire punished the Serpent's exposed flank, smashing gun ports and sending deadly wooden splinters scything through the air. Men screamed as they fell, blood slicking the deck beneath Eliza's feet, but Blackwood's gamble worked. The Crimson Serpent slipped past the momentarily crippled frigate, gaining the precious minutes needed to reach the Western Passage. "They're launching boats," Barrick shouted from the quarterdeck. "Boarding parties!" 3 longboats packed with Marines pulled away from the Indomitable, rowing hard to intercept the damaged pirate vessel before it could escape. "Prepare to repel boarders," Blackwood ordered, his voice carrying over the chaos. He drew his sword, a magnificent blade with an ornate guard that had once belonged to his father. "Miss Montgomery, join the navigator. Keep us on course for the passage." Eliza hesitated, torn between duty and the desire to stand with Blackwood. "Captain, that's an order," he said firmly, but then his expression softened. "I need your mind more than your blade right now." She nodded and hurried to the navigation table, where Ramirez was struggling to maintain their bearings amid the smoke and confusion. Together, they charted the treacherous course through the shallows ahead, while behind them the crew prepared for the coming assault. The first longboat reached them as they approached the passage entrance. Marine sharpshooters provided covering fire, while their comrades threw grappling hooks to secure lines for boarding. Pirates fell under the disciplined volley, but returned fire with pistols and swivel guns mounted on the rails. Through the smoke, Eliza saw a figure in the lead boat that made her blood run cold. Commodore Edgar Lancaster himself, resplendent in his naval uniform, directing the attack with cold precision. Their eyes met across the narrowing gap between vessels, and recognition dawned in his face. "Eliza Montgomery," he called, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "So the rumors were true. You've thrown your lot in with pirates and thieves." Blackwood glanced sharply between them, understanding flaring in his eyes. "Better thieves with honor than officials without it," Eliza shouted back. Lancaster's face contorted with rage. "Secure the woman alive!" he ordered his Marines. "Kill the rest." The boarding action that followed was brutal and desperate. Marines swarmed onto the Crimson Serpent's deck, meeting fierce resistance from Blackwood's crew. Steel clashed against steel, pistols discharged at point-blank range, and men grappled in deadly embraces along the blood-slicked planking. Blackwood fought like a demon, his blade a silver blur as he cut a path through the Marines. Barrick stood at his side, a massive cutlass in one hand and a boarding axe in the other, each swing clearing space around his captain. From her position near the helm, Eliza saw Lancaster himself board, flanked by his personal guard. The Commodore's cold eyes scanned the chaos, seeking Blackwood with single-minded purpose. "Captain!" she shouted in warning. "Lancaster!" The 2 men who had once been comrades, now bitter enemies, locked eyes across the deck. Around them, the battle seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the personal nature of their conflict. "James Thorne," Lancaster called, drawing his officer's sword. "It's time we finished what began 20 years ago." Blackwood's smile was terrible to behold. "On that much, Edgar, we agree." Steel rang against steel as Blackwood and Lancaster circled each other on the blood-slicked deck. Around them, the battle raged. Marines and pirates locked in desperate combat, while both ships drifted dangerously close to the rocky shoals. "You always were skilled with a blade," Lancaster remarked, "parrying a thrust with practiced ease. A pity you chose to waste that skill as a common criminal." "Better a criminal with honor than a naval officer without it," Blackwood replied, echoing Eliza's earlier sentiment. His next attack drove Lancaster back several steps. From her position near the helm, Eliza struggled to maintain their course while watching the duel unfold. The Crimson Serpent was dangerously close to the passage entrance, where jagged rocks lurked beneath the surface. "The ship won't hold much longer," Ramirez warned beside her. "That last broadside opened us below the waterline." Indeed, the pirate vessel was listing slightly, its wounded hull taking on water faster than the pumps could clear it. If they didn't reach open water soon, they would founder on the very rocks they had hoped would be their salvation. "Hold this heading," she instructed Ramirez, her mind made up. "I need to help the captain." Before the old navigator could protest, Eliza grabbed a fallen cutlass and made her way through the chaos toward Blackwood and Lancaster. Their duel had intensified, both men bearing minor wounds, their faces locked in masks of concentration and hate. "Your father died a traitor's death," Lancaster taunted, landing a glancing blow to Blackwood's shoulder. "Begging for mercy at the end, liar." Blackwood's next attack was fueled by rage, leaving him momentarily exposed. Lancaster seized the advantage, his blade slicing across Blackwood's sword arm. The captain staggered back, his weapon nearly falling from suddenly numbed fingers. "And now the son follows the father," Lancaster declared triumphantly, moving in for the kill. "Not today," Eliza intervened, her cutlass deflecting Lancaster's killing stroke. She placed herself protectively before the wounded Blackwood, blade raised in challenge. Lancaster's eyes widened, then narrowed with cruel amusement. The merchant's daughter playing at pirates. "How utterly charming. The merchant's daughter who rejected you," she corrected, her stance firm despite her racing heart. "Who saw through your facade of honor to the corruption beneath." His smile vanished. "You know nothing of my affairs." "I know enough." She circled cautiously, buying time for Blackwood to recover. "I know your family's position was purchased with Spanish gold. I know you betrayed James Thorne's father to protect your grandfather's secret." Genuine shock flashed across Lancaster's face. "Impossible. Those records were destroyed, were they?" Blackwood had regained his feet, blood soaking his sleeve, but his sword once more steady in his hand. He nodded toward the leather satchel secured at his belt. "We found quite an interesting historical archive on that island." Understanding dawned in Lancaster's eyes, followed by a calculating coldness that chilled Eliza to the bone. He glanced at his marines, still fighting across the deck. "Take the woman and the satchel," he commanded the nearest soldiers. "Kill everyone else." The battle intensified as Lancaster's men pressed forward with renewed purpose. But Blackwood's crew, hearing the exchange, fought with the desperation of men who now understood the true stakes. This was no longer merely about escape, it was about justice, long delayed. A tremendous crash rocked the ship as the Crimson Serpent scraped against hidden rocks at the passage entrance. The impact sent men from both sides sprawling across the tilting deck. "We're taking on water fast, Captain," Quinn shouted from below. "Minutes at most." Blackwood exchanged a meaningful glance with Barrick, who nodded grimly and began quietly organizing the crew. A plan formed without words, a final gambit born of desperation and trust. "It seems we're sinking," Blackwood addressed Lancaster with remarkable calm. "Your prize is slipping away, Commodore." "Then I'll take what I came for and leave you to drown," Lancaster replied coldly, gesturing for his men to secure the satchel. "I think not." Blackwood's smile was dangerous. "Now, Barrick!" At his signal, barrels that had been positioned along the deck were suddenly opened, releasing streams of lamp oil that spread rapidly across the planking. Before Lancaster's men could react, Quinn tossed a lit torch into the nearest puddle. Fire erupted with explosive force, cutting off the Marines from their longboats and driving them back toward the forecastle. In the confusion, Blackwood seized both Eliza and the precious satchel, pulling them toward the starboard rail, where Barrick had prepared their own small boat. "Abandon ship!" Blackwood ordered his crew, every man for himself. Lancaster, seeing his prize escaping, charged through the flames in desperate pursuit. "Stop them!" The Commodore's blind rage made him careless. As he lunged forward, the weakened decking gave way beneath his weight, trapping his leg in splintered wood. He cried out in pain and fury as Blackwood, Eliza, and several crew members lowered their boat into the churning waters. "You can't escape, Thorne," Lancaster shouted, struggling to free himself as flames approached. "The Indomitable will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Perhaps," Blackwood called back, "but not with you commanding her." As their small boat pulled away, the Crimson Serpent's fate was sealed. Flames engulfed the once proud vessel, climbing the rigging to create a funeral pyre visible for miles. Lancaster's Marines, realizing their commander was trapped, finally moved to rescue him from the inferno. "Your ship," Eliza said softly. Watching the burning vessel with a mixture of sorrow and awe. Ships can be replaced, Blackwood replied, his hand covering hers where it rested on the satchel. Some things are more valuable. He opened the leather container, revealing not only the Spanish ledgers, but also the ancient stone map they had discovered. Together, they represented both the past and a possible future, justice for old wrongs, and perhaps a new beginning. As they rowed toward the far side of the passage where the Indomitable could not follow, Eliza realized that the childhood promise she had made so impulsively had led her to a destiny far more complex and wondrous than she could have imagined. The little girl's declaration had been fulfilled, though not in any way she could have predicted. "What now, Captain?" she asked, watching the shoreline of the mysterious island recede behind them. Blackwood's gaze met hers, and for the first time since she had known him, his eyes held something beyond determination or anger. They held hope. "Now," he said simply, "we write our own legend." Kingston Harbor bustled with activity as ships from across the Caribbean loaded and unloaded their cargo. Among them, a sleek vessel with distinctive blue-gray sails stood out, neither merchant nor naval in design, but something unique, like its owners. The Blue Horizon had been commissioned 6 months after the fiery end of the Crimson Serpent. In that time, much had changed in the Caribbean. Commodore Lancaster had survived the burning ship, but his reputation had not. The Spanish ledgers, delivered anonymously to the Admiralty, had exposed generations of corruption within his family. Stripped of rank and position, he now awaited trial in London. For James Blackwood, or James Thorne, as he was increasingly known, the ledgers had brought vindication. His father's name had been posthumously cleared, and while his own activities as a pirate could not be entirely overlooked, the Crown had granted a partial pardon in recognition of the service rendered by exposing Lancaster's treachery. The pardon allowed him to move in society again. Though many still regarded him with suspicion, it was enough, however, to secure financing for a new ship and a letter of marque, a license to act as a privateer against Spanish interests, effectively legitimizing what he had done for years. On the Blue Horizon's quarterdeck, Eliza Thorne adjusted her spyglass, scanning the horizon with the practiced eye of a seasoned navigator. Marriage had changed her name, but not her spirit. She still preferred trousers to dresses when at sea, and her expertise in navigation had only grown with time and experience. "Anything of interest?" James asked, joining her at the rail. The past year had softened some of the harder lines in his face, though his eyes remained as sharp and observant as ever. "Clear sailing," she replied, lowering the glass. "We should reach the coordinates by tomorrow noon, if this wind holds." The coordinates in question had been calculated from the ancient stone map they had discovered on the Isle of Forgotten Souls. After months of study and consultation with scholars in Port Royal, they had determined it depicted an archipelago far to the south, islands rumored to hold riches beyond imagining. "The crew is ready," James noted, surveying the men working efficiently across the deck. Many had followed him from the Crimson Serpent, their loyalty undiminished by the change in fortune. Barrick still served as first mate, Quinn as quartermaster, and Ramirez had trained a successor, but insisted on joining this voyage, perhaps the old navigator's last great adventure. "As am I," Eliza said, her hand unconsciously moving to the brass button she still carried, now fastened to the inside of her leather vest, close to her heart. "Though my father remains convinced we're chasing myths and legends, Edward Montgomery had weathered his own storms during these months. With Lancaster's fall, his shipping business had begun to recover, and the revelation of his daughter's adventures had made him something of a curiosity in Port Royal society. He had been initially horrified to learn of her life among pirates, then grudgingly impressed by her resilience, and finally resigned to her unconventional choice of husband. "Myths and legends often contain truths worth finding," James replied, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I should know. A little girl once made me a promise that seemed impossible, Eliza smiled at the memory. She was rather forward, wasn't she? Terribly improper, he agreed with mock solemnity. Making marriage proposals to pirates. What would society say? Society has said plenty, she laughed. I've simply stopped listening. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting the ship in golden light, James withdrew a small wooden box from his coat. Inside lay a miniature portrait, his mother, Lady Catherine Thorne, now framed alongside a more recent addition, a small, delicate painting of Eliza. She would have liked you, he said softly. She valued courage above all else. I wish I could have known her, Eliza replied, touched by the sentiment. The man beside her had travelled so far from the fearsome Captain Blackwood, who had once terrified the Caribbean. Yet that strength remained, now tempered with something she might call contentment. The ship's bell rang, signalling the change of watch. As crew members rotated positions, James and Eliza remained at the rail, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The freedom of being beyond all laws and obligations." He considered the question thoughtfully. "Sometimes, but true freedom isn't found in lawlessness. It's found in choosing your own path, regardless of what others expect." His gaze met hers. "You taught me that in your way." The blue horizon cut smoothly through deepening twilight, its course set for unknown waters. Behind them lay the past, vindication, justice, and healing. Before them stretched possibility, new discoveries, adventures, perhaps even the legendary islands with their promised riches. But the greatest treasure had already been found in the most unexpected of ways. A childhood promise fulfilled against impossible odds. A captain redeemed by love as much as by justice, and a merchant's daughter who had discovered that the truest freedom came not from escape, but from finding where she truly belonged. As darkness fell completely, the stars emerged in full glory, the same stars that had guided sailors for centuries, constant yet ever-changing in their patterns, much like the twisting paths of fate that had brought them to this moment. At the wheel, James Thorne set their course by those eternal lights, while beside him, Eliza charted their journey into whatever tomorrow might bring, together as equals, bound by a promise made in childhood and honored in ways neither could have imagined. The blue horizon sailed on into legend.